Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this third episode of the Vivekananda lecture series, uh, which is a series of 12 lectures on the 12th of every month, January through December 2022. Today, like I said, we've already had two episodes, and today for the third episode, we are pleased to have Dr. Flight Lieutenant M.A. Balasubramanya, Advisor, Community Processes and Primary Health Care, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Govt of India, as our guest today. The theme for today's discussion is Vivekananda, the Great Institution Builder. This series is brought to you by the Vivekananda Institute of Indian Studies, which is a unit of the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, SVYM. VIS goal is to introduce India and Indianness to the world. Before I start, I'll briefly introduce Dr. Flight Lieutenant M.A. Balasubramanya, who's commonly known as MAB. He's presently the advisor on community processes and comprehensive primary health care in the National Health System Resource Center, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Govt of India, where he leads efforts in operationalization of 150,000 Ayushman Bharat health and wellness centers across the country. This comes on the back of a long and successful stint at the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, which he joined at the age of 17, along with a group of medical friends who founded SVYM. He has contributed largely to the initiation, growth, and evolution of the organization, co-founding its hospitals, schools, colleges, livelihood, leadership, and Indian Studies Institutes. He has held leadership positions in the organization, having been its past president and chief executive officer. In April 2018, he successfully transitioned the operational leadership to a second generation team. In his nearly 37 years of experience volunteering and working in the non-profit sector, he has wide-ranging experience in managing issues of health, education, research, training, evaluation, and advocacy. His areas of special interest include leadership development, tribal and rural development, non-profit management, integrative health, HIV/AIDS, emergency medicine, palliative care, and comprehensive management of chronic illnesses. He has been the recipient of several national and international awards. A pleasure and privilege to have you as our guest, Dr. Bharat. And
thank you, Mr. Ramesh, for this introduction and opportunity to be amongst all of you as well as the entire audience over here. In fact, it has been quite some time since I engaged with the organization or any of such activities in the recent past. In fact, almost it's 2 years since I spoke to anybody on that account. So it gives me a great honor and privilege to be part of it today.
Thank you, sir. And the format of the lecture, sir, will be as follows. Dr. MAB will speak for about 15 minutes on the topic of the day, which is Vivekananda, the Great Institutional Builder. This shall be followed by a moderated Q&A. Participants may also please post their questions in the chat box. Today's closing remarks will be delivered by Mr. Praveen Kumar, Chief Strategy Officer, SVY. Over to you, Dr. Opening.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's indeed, I would say, quite difficult and challenging to be speaking on somebody who has actually guided our life for so long and probably has left an imprint or continue to influence many of our actions even today. And talking about that person in just about 15 minutes and looking at our own life of 55 years on that count doesn't seem to be an easy task, but I'm sure some of the ramblings that I'm going to do over the next couple of minutes will help me rejuvenate myself more than what I would say I will be contributing to others. Because I still remember there was a time when the management was very young and all the staff were very old. And now the converse is actually happening. And it is also very, very happy note to know this one. See, when I looked at Swami Vivekananda's this one journey, I was looking at my own age and the age of the organization of Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement. I was just reflecting on it, saying that it's so nice that Vivekananda died for 40 years because nobody has a photograph of his gray hairs. Okay. The world can never have it also because whatever he accomplished or whatever he guided was in his prime of his youth. And he left the world in his prime of the youth. So nobody could even etch a photograph of the old person. And no wonder he is going to be the youth icon for generations to come by. And he seems to be a real old wine, because I was talking to one of our, I would say, well-wishers when we were celebrating the 150th anniversary of Swami Vivekananda's birth celebrations. And that person was actually had participated in the 100th anniversary celebrations. Okay, that celebrations anyway, I can be proudly saying that I was not even born. So, but he said, I just said, you have seen both 100 and 150 years. What is the difference? And he said, I won a prize in the 1963 in the 100th centenary celebrations of Swami Vivekananda in an extempore talk in Bangalore. And that book I preserve very dearly. But in 150th year, you're making me walk with such a big caravan in front that I'm amazed by the celebration that is happening. It has virtually touched every village, every corner, and everybody seems to be celebrating rather than just an extempore speech in one of the closed halls that the centenary celebrations had. In other words, what we are trying to look at is the fact that as days progress, Vivekananda is becoming more and more popular, more and more relevant, okay, and probably more and more influencing the thought processes of the world at large. In that context, I would say that's the type of person we are looking at. The comment that actually, I would say, looking at the topic that you said, then as an institutional builder, I don't think anybody would ever be challenging his words when he said that three Indians cannot spend 5 minutes together without having contradictions and dispersing. And the greatest thing that the European nations have ever taught us is the concept of organization. In fact, in Paris, he says that this is the place where the first of the universities got emerged in this one, and he was speaking there. And he always challenged we countrymen, saying that we can't build organizations, we can't stay together, because we never understood the context of this one. In fact, when he talks about this one, I would say the concept of organization being a means of division of labor rather than anything else is something very powerfully comes out. And he clearly says organization is nothing but each of us do our own bit and all parts come together, create an ideal harmony, and that's all it is there. And the greatest power for anybody would be an organization, and the secret of this is obedience. And this is a great challenge that he has posed all of us. Okay, to be creative of an organization, and for that organization you need obedience. I think they two are contradictory to each other. For an Indian, this one who all along has actually thrived on the Advaitic philosophy of saying that I am the whole and soul, I am God myself. So when you are looking at that context of spiritual individualism, to bring this social communism is not that easy. Okay, because that's in our roots that we have spiritual individualism, and then bringing that into this one. So looking at those, so I think when I look back, what actually could create this one is maybe the word practical Vedanta actually influenced greatly in terms of our thought processes. Why? Because he said whatever is the highest ideal, if it is not made practical, it has no meaning. So the challenge of building an organization or thriving an organization worldwide is to actually look at this highest ideal of organizing being a power by itself and division of labor being the tool for an organization, but ingraining in it the perfect secret of obedience. This, I would say, getting this turmeric together is not easy. And probably that is what actually excited this one. And if this has to be made practical, and I would say that is practical Vedanta. And if I look at Swami Vivekananda's life in a very short this one, the first organization he ever created was not in India. I'm sure many of you would recollect that. It was in New York in 1894, in his very first visit, immediately after the Chicago lecture. He actually started the Vedanta Society of North America in New York. That Vedanta Society in New York was the first organization he ever conceived. And in fact, in one of his letters, he even says that time is not right to move him out because it is still being organized into a very framework. In fact, today, New York Society Swamis always talk saying that we are older than the Belur Mutt. Because the Belur Mutt was actually started off much later than this. So in that context, if you're looking at that, so he also learned the art of it from the outside. Three things actually stand out in Vivekananda's work. I would say four things, not even three. The first and the foremost thing is all his action came out of his deep understanding of the Indian philosophy. In fact, he himself says all the time trying to talk is what Veda, Upanishads has already spoken. There is nothing new that I'm going to speak about. And that is what is there. The second thing that he actually brings in all his understanding is his master's voice. Though he hardly spoke about the word master, nor he spoke about Swami Ramakrishna, this one, but he was actually a missionary. In fact, the only time that I have actually remembered that he has written very strongly about it is when he writes to one Divanji, saying that he has touched very close to his heart the fact that he took care of his mother, and the mother is a very soft spot in his life. And he taking care of him, he has actually touched his soft spot. And in that, he says that there is no other way that I could have carried on the mission of my great master, but for renouncing the world. He says that. In fact, he clearly says that for his master's sake, he renounced the world because his master's vision and mission has to be taken to the world. And that was the reason why he actually renounced the world. So in that context, if you look at that, his entire passion was to translate his guru's words or philosophy into real world actions on the ground. And Swami Ramakrishna himself stood for harmony in everything. In fact, he was a person who brought in synchronous action in every asynchrony that we looked at and brought about harmony of religions itself as a matter of fact. And the most popular word of Jato Mat Tato Pat, matlab, how many people are there, so many people are there, so many means are there to reach the truth, is the second thing that he actually took it very deeply. So for him, philosophy to making it practical was a very, very important element. And that's what he demonstrated, is what I personally feel. First, he took the Upanishads and made it practical. He took his master's philosophy, made it practical. And the third thing that stands out is, while everybody in the deepest contemplation has looked at the highest ideal, the God, or whatever the consciousness that we talk about, he's a person who actually, you can definitely say, more than a monk, he was a patriot. So he traveled, I would say, length and breadth of this country, actually took up everything that was relevant on the ground and started talking about how this country has to be developed. Okay, that was again a very practical oriented. So if you want to look at institution building, you can't have a better one. Looking at the roots, translating it to realities, looking at philosophies, translating it to realities, and the obedience that he had for his master, though he questioned him repeatedly, but once convinced, he put everything into action. Third, and making every action relevant to his countrymen. Okay, this is something that comes out very strongly if I look at the entire context in which he has driven his life. And another important thing, it's very astonishing. When he traveled to America, he was nobody. Even in the ship, probably nobody recognized him. Okay. Incidentally, Jamshedji Tata met him, and probably at that time when he spoke also, he was an innocuous person who was actually a common saint who was traveling on a ship. Okay. But that person had a great influence in the whole system. But if you look at that, that was in 1893. And 1902, he was no more. September 11th, 1863, he came to be known in this world. And 4th July 1902, he is no longer in this world. And see the work that he left behind. Everything very practical, everything very iconic. Okay. And I would say iconic in the sense that it is emulatable models of philosophy that he actually brought in. And this is something that we all would admire of when you talk about what short span of life, what depth of activities that can be done, and how every philosophy can be practiced into realities. So for me, if we look at the administration of the whole thing over there, it is about deep rooting ourselves into the philosophical things, which is so rich, and getting that into very pragmatic idealism. So I would look at the sum and substance of an organization building is to look at the highest idea, I would say philosophy, or the highest ideal into the most practical reality. If we are able to get those two together, any organization would thrive all along. The day we start compromising between this ideal and pragmatism or practical reality, we will start going down the hill. So not giving up the ideal is the first thing. First, catching the ideal. First, I would say, let us understand the ideal. The second thing is, let us get methods to make the ideal practical. This is the second step that I would look at in every act of this one. And combining this idealism and immense wisdom, you make men. Who are those men? I would say his idealism, when we talk about, in fact, I will tell you the depth, in fact, in his own words, men should be strong as strength itself. At the same time, they should have a woman's heart. It is not trying to undermine a woman, it is extolling a woman, saying that the sensitivity, that empathy that she brings into the in nature is something that all of us have to embrace. So he wants men of that qualities, strong as strength itself, and having the emotional sensitivity as a woman. And if we are able to get those two together, we will have the right men to this one. And the fourth thing that he says, all things that are there with respect to philosophies and other things, they all have come out of rishis. Again, he comes back into the roots of the Advaitic philosophy here. He says that you are rishis yourself. So it is not about copying and pasting something. So it is not about an American company, IBM, being translated into Infosys. It is not about Detroit's automobile industry becoming a Tata Motors over here. It is not that. It is not cut and paste and copying the whole thing there. It is about getting into this ideal, understanding, finding a methods to this ideal, because these ideals don't change. The truth never pays homage to the society. Society has to pay homage to the truth. And that truth, if you are going to hold on, whether it's America, whether it's Europe, whether it's India, whether it's a village or a capital, it doesn't matter. So in that context, that is what I would look at that as the core philosophies which actually he starts propagating as far as building an organization is and building an institution itself. And this is where he always says, in a country like ours, however, it does not seem quite practical to me to start an organization on a democratic basis at that point of time. He says that, okay, we need to be first educated, then we'll become less jealous of each other. So I think education, if it is leading on to jealousy, is not education, it's only literacy. If we have gone into a competitive world because of education, that means we are not actually this one. So I would go into that thing. And three things that he actually pushed, which actually, though I would say personally, his saying of so long as millions of Indians, I would say millions live in hunger and ignorance, I call each person a traitor who, having been educated at the cost of the millions, pay least heed to them. Is a statement which motivated me or inspired me to get connected with his life. Okay. But I would say there are a lot of other things that came in during the process, which actually helped me carry through the organizational process. One of the things that I always held very dear to myself is, it is the conviction in the power of goodness. Okay. absence of jealousy and suspicion, helping all who are trying to be and do good. This is something which is a fire that actually can build 100,000 men and women who will then go to the poor, the fallen, the downtrodden, anywhere, and then teach the gospel of truth and development. So if you are looking at that, we require these three others. The other important element, which actually, see, when we talk about an organization, we talk about an organization vision and mission. And this vision and mission should be of the highest type. Because unless and until, why do you require an highest ideal? He himself says this. And a man with ideal, if he makes 1,000 mistakes, a man without ideal will make 50,000 mistakes. So in which case, out of 50,000, 49,000 mistakes will come down. When you have an highest ideal and you breathe to that ideal all the time. And to that ideal, if you are strictly connected, not that we don't err, but that is the basic compass which brings us back into the track. So it is a beautiful navigation tool if you have that highest ideal, and that ideal should be our mission and vision. And from that ideal to reach that ideal is the ingrained values that comes from our deep-rooted philosophy, which actually goes in search of the truth. And that's how the whole system could be energized. Is something that actually clearly influenced our thoughts in many ways. The other is the thing that comes in very strongly in his voice is freedom. Okay. And I think there seems to be a contradiction when we talk. We are obedient. We are in an organization, but at the same time, we are in what I would say, we are pursuing a path of freedom. How does it actually come through is something that is very, very perplexing to actually note. But he gives an answer for that also. He says that it is always these contradictions of virtues which actually makes you better. So in that way, it always puts you in this one. It is almost like a compass which keeps moving left and right to come into the correct position. So in that context, this contradictions is actually makes us much better. But what is freedom? This is where the power actually I understood what exactly is the highest example. In fact, I would say on one side, when you're talking about organization, we talk about work, we talk about duty, and duty is seldom sweet. Okay. But how can a duty become sweet in an organizational setup? This is an answer that he gives. He says duty becomes sweet only when it is smeared with the grease of love. Okay. And when you want to grease this with love, duty is sweet only when there is love, and love can shine only when you have freedom. So that means you need to have the highest expression of freedom in terms of forbearance. And that expression of forbearance as the forbearance tinged freedom automatically manifests as love. And when that love gets smeared into duty, it becomes sweet. So then you start enjoying the work. There's no more work. Okay. So the context of having an ideal and context of enjoying your work, I think these two are enmeshed if you want to really look at satisfaction in this one. And all these things is practically what you said. And building an organization is all about building this culture in the organization, which I would say is the character of an organization, just like a character is for an individual. So if I look at character, I would say for what personality and character is for an individual, I would say this is the same thing for an organization is in terms of culture. So getting these two together is what thrives an organization. And such an organization, I would say, death is very difficult for it. Okay. And of course, living up to the nature, death is imminent for anything that is born. But if that's death for a human being is 100 years, for an organization, it can be 1,000 years. Okay. And that's the result. So it is not about fear of death here, or nor is it a love of death here. It is an acceptance of truth that anything born has to die. But the lifespan from an ant to a human being, to an organization are different in what you're today. And the real potential of anything gets manifested when it is actually able to thrive for the expected life. And this expected life of an organization, I would say, should be 1,000 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vivekananda. The reason I chose this topic also is because in my limited interactions with you, I have seen how you've been constantly one of your greatest strengths is, as I have noticed, is the ability to not just build an organization but also take people along. I mean, that is a critical aspect. You spoke about obedience, you spoke about values and all of as critical to organizations. So it is one thing to have values that define an organization, but another thing to institutionalize values inside an institution. So institutionalizing itself is a difficult process, because like an organization has people coming in, people going out, and therefore the critical need to keep values alive and relevant is crucial to institutionalizing these values. So as an institution grows bigger and older, and since you also mentioned that institutions have to last for 1,000 years, how does one go about institutionalizing these values and keeping them alive?
In fact, I was recently looking at some document and suddenly hit a ground with one article by Phil Goldberg. And he writes about American Veda. Okay. And in that, he talks about how Swami Vivekananda influenced the very root of Vedantic philosophy within the American system, and that evolution of what we are talking about in the West in terms of the Vedantic understanding, etc., which basically means it's much more than it's a harmony of religions, is what the India this one is. When I talk about Swami Vivekananda's thought process, or Sri Ramakrishna Swami process, because he's a person who actually looked at all religions as true, and every route to the spirituality or the highest ideal is true. And in that he says, Swami was a very smart guy. Okay. So what is it? The chapter's name is Swami taught the smart guys, and the smart guys taught the rest of us. Okay. So why does he say that? He says that because all the people who actually he touched and shared all these philosophies were all very big people. Aldous Huxley, Joseph Campbell, Houston Smith, all of them philosophers and literatures and other things at very highest level, who were all teachers. He went to universities and things. So he spoke the, so in other way, he was the trainer of trainers rather than training. So here also what I would say is institutionalizing a mechanism, whatever it is. When I'm talking about values, values are not taught, it is caught. Okay. And how many people can you influence in an organization? I actually clearly said organization, as you said, is all about division of labor. Okay. Division of labor means they're already in small bits. Lot of people, lot of teams are actually working, and all of them are self-directed learners, self-directors. Work teams is what we need to ultimately emerge out of. A family of 6 is what we Indians are very comfortable with. Okay. So if I would look at it, if each of our actions can influence 5 people around us, that's enough. Don't make a big this one. It has its own percolatory effect. And more important, we also should look at the core of, again, it is Vivekananda's philosophy. The core of religion is what? Is to do good, be good, and feel good. This is the core of every religion. So be good, feel good, and do good is the core of religion. Just be that. That is one factor. The second thing is, you also might appreciate the fact saying that everybody wants to be that. Do good, feel good. Nobody wants to be seen as bad, feeling bad, and doing bad. I don't think there is in there. So this inherent element of goodness in an individual has to be exploited. If I want to put it in a very blunt, crude way, I would say it is an exploitation of the goodness in an individual for, I would say, upholding a cultural value. Because that goodness itself is a culture. And goodness is already inherent in the person over there. And this influence can easily come out in influencing a couple of it. It is not influencing in real sense. They catch it because if you are there, because anybody would be working with 5 or 6 people around. And if you are able to do that, that takes care of this one. And those 6 people would automatically be working with 6 more people. This has got a percolatory effect. And this is what one. The second element of this, I would like to reiterate the fact is, values are inherent in everything. Values, like I've always felt, values is like water. You want to make coffee, it has got water. You want to make jamun, it has got water. If you want to make a rice, it has got water. If you want to make sambar, it has got water. So what activity you do, what dish you come out with is immaterial. Water is there, percolating in this and permeating through everything. So values can be there in everything. The basic understanding in the concept is values got broken off when we talked about science as different one from spirituality or service. This is where the values actually started conflicting. But it is not contradicting, because science looks at exploring the truth of the external nature. Spirituality looks at exploring the truth of an internal nature. And when both are exploring truth, and truth is one, where exactly is the contradiction? There is the conflict. But unfortunately, this is neither reiterated nor has been codified into a mechanism where it can be transacted and understood. I would give a simple example of a science teacher teaching balanced diet to a school, the school children. You have 70% carbohydrates. You have about 20%, 25% fat, a 4% of protein, and then you have 1% which actually comprises of all your vitamins, minerals, etc., trace elements, etc. So when I look at this entire thing, the science teacher just breaks it down into these components and explains to them this is balanced diet, though we know on our plate we can't count the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, or trace elements and minerals. But however, they miss on one important element which could actually be manifested into the humanities. Thankfully, even IITs are now including humanities into their course. Otherwise, because we as science graduates completely are bereft with humanities, we lose the sensitivity at many instances of time. So now when you're looking at this context over there, the element of the balanced diet can immediately be translated into an external environment of a society. Now, if I look at a large march of 70% carbohydrates, are they important? Yes. One CEO, a small security team, are they important? So, if in a balanced diet, the trace element of mineral is as important as a 70% carbohydrate, and a 25% fat is as important as a 4% protein. That means to say balance comes when every element, irrespective of the proportions, have their due value, due recognition, due inclusion. So in that context, when you look at, then immediately you can realize, if you are running an organization, who is important or who is not important. Okay, so each of them have a role to play, whether it's a security guard at the door, or the CEO sitting at the helm of affairs, or the workhorses who are taking the mission to the streets. Everybody is equally important, and each of them are performing their role, and each role contributes to the overall organization mission and vision. If this could be imbibed from a science balanced diet, then probably we would be able to relate to our daily life much more easily than otherwise. So this is where inculcating values actually comes in. So inculcating values is not a textbook to be written about it, or a class to be dictated on that, and an evaluation to be carried forward at this one. It has to be permeating through every action, thought, word, action at all times can manifest it in one way or the other. And this is where the value inculcation actually happens, is my belief. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a question that has come up in the chat. I'll club it with another question that I already had. SVYM is a fairly large institution now. And so the question is, what aspect of Vivekananda's work has helped in its growth, or rather, in your experience of building SVYM over the years, what were the lessons from Swamiji that you found particularly inspiring and helpful? And if you could also relate it to if the journey till date has been in alignment with the initial thought process and the mission, vision, and all of that, or have there been any changes that you felt during the journey that has happened to date?
See, I will take the last question first and then take the next one. If something is not changing, it's dead. Okay. As a doctor also, I look for movements. Okay. Your chest has to be expanding. That means it has to be changing its position. Your heart has to be expanding and contracting. It has to be changing its position. Your pupils have to be dilating and constricting to be actually concerned. So without change, no organization is going to live. But Vivekananda himself explains it. He says, evolution does not mean throwing away the past, throwing away the old. Or evolution also does not mean living under the father's trees. That is also not evolution there. So evolution basically means retaining what is essential from the past and embracing what is relevant to the current and the future. So this is beautifully looked at even in a growth of a tree. Every spring, the leaves change, but the roots don't. Okay. So in that context over there, we need to consolidate the roots and the trunk, but always allow the leaves to be fresh every year in this month. So change should be there. And SVYM has definitely changed. In fact, I would say from a time when it was only a philosophical, I would say to a certain extent, if I'm not very angry, it is about reclaiming the streets, going there instead of begging, delivering, okay, to becoming what we call now as a development organization and evolving itself into a research organization and sometimes acting like a watchdog for the whole thing. So different roles that this organization has already started playing in different arenas. So this is where the one important element of evolution comes in, and how it becomes relevant in different contexts, depending on the way it evolves. And it is also the way it evolves will help you thrive also. If you are not able to, in the current statutory environment, it is not easy to thrive as an old baking bowl organization. We need to be self-sufficient. We are talking about a sustainable development goal. In a sustainable world, it means sustaining organizations also is equally important over it. So this change is what has helped our organization to last more than 37 years now. Okay, this is also one factor that I would like to bring forward to. The second important thing is it's a very complex and large organization is what we say. Okay, so is nature. Because why I mean nature? All people come with different. Because each of you who actually have got into the platform of SVYM, which is actually the way that SVYM has always been described. SVYM is only a platform. And it is always important that everybody comes in and exhibits their talent in the best interest of the society. The only hallmark which Vivekananda has put for all of us is to do it with an unselfish motive. Okay, this is something that is the hallmark. So for morality, it requires nothing else except a complete immersion into the motive of unselfishness. Nothing else is required. And so then what is the real test? Swami Vivekananda has answered for that also. The real test of the leader lies in holding widely different people together along the line of common sympathies. The common sympathies is already clearly defined. It is the highest ideal, which is very clearly, as I told you, it is about finding a method of madness amongst the madness to ensure that we have the highest ideal with the most practical approach. So this factor of immense practicality with immense idealism is what our ideal is. And for that, As long as this idealism is kept everybody by there, in your area you practice it, it is the leader's responsibility and maturity to actually bring these different people together along the line of common sympathies. And that's the challenge for a leader.
There is one other question that I wanted to ask on similar lines. One of the things that I was doing in preparation for this 12-month seminar is trying to find out how many institutions in India are named after Swami Vivekananda. So I found that of the 38 Indian cultural centers abroad, 23 are named after Swami Vivekananda, which means only 15 are named all Indian outside India, that is. And we have more than 1,000 or much more than 1,000 schools, institutions, colleges named after him. You touched upon this, but there is something about the man that he continues to actually, his importance, his relevance, this one seems to increase over the years and never diminishes. So he continues to inspire people when he was alive. He continues to inspire now. So what do you think? Because I also want you to travel back to your when you were 17, and what was it that moved you? Because that has stayed with you for such a long time. So, and what is it that the sustained impact of Swamiji's thoughts and ideas on nation and institutional building that inspired you as well as continues to inspire the younger generation even today?
I have twofold reply to this. The first and the foremost thing that I would look at is, it's happy that so many people, so many institutions are being named after Swami Vivekananda, just like there are many people who are now complaining about the same family getting named everywhere. Okay, so at least it should not get into the same way. And it is also true that I don't know whether Swami Vivekananda himself would have liked it, because for him, he never wanted another Vivekananda except for one who can understand himself, because this is something he told walking just before his Mahaprayan, the final journey. Apparently under the Bilva tree, when he was actually walking, he suddenly proclaimed, saying that only another Vivekananda will actually know what this Vivekananda has done. Okay, and this is the I would say muttering which has been overheard and documented in the annals of Sri Ramakrishna mission. But he himself was very strong on one factor. I want the fishermen to be the best fishermen. I wanted the best, I would say, the teacher to be the best teacher, the doctor to be the best teacher. So if you are Ramesh, you should be the best Ramesh, not Vivekananda at all. So by naming Vivekananda, are we trying to deprive ourselves of the responsibility of becoming ourselves? Is a question that we also have to look at on this one. So ultimately, the fact of the matter is, he clearly says he has not brought anything new to this world. Okay, he has only tried to look at what our rich heritage has brought in, and not simply reveling in the past, come back and make it relevant to the current context. So probably why people are embracing him, why he is continuously relevant, is he never talked about tools. He talked about principles. Okay. So when I talk about this, I would understand in this, why does he become relevant? This is because his principles and values is what he proclaimed to the world. He allowed the processes to be very free and allow people to actually manipulate the processes as long as the end result is reaching the highest ideal. So there are two ends pegged already. So your starting point and the ending point are already pegged. The starting point is that you need to look at you will start from wherever you are to become the best, and that best is the highest ideal. There is no way out. Wherever you are born, however you are born, that is your starting point, but you have to reach the highest ideal. And for that highest ideal, these are this one. In fact, he even says, if you are not having any problems on the road, please check, you may not be on the right road. Okay. That means if at all, if you're going through the right road, resistance is something that is there, and he extols poverty, he extols challenges for the simple reason says that is what makes us better. That is what is one. So in that we become stronger. Okay. So in that way, he never was worried about any resistance, because resistance is something he was very sure proves that he was on the right track. So his ideal is all there. So if we have our highest ideal of realizing our own divinity, because all his words, he keep on telling that, okay, we need to, every soul is potentially divine. This is giving a statement. And for everything, it was manifestation of the divinity only. What is religion? Manifestation of the perfection already in man. What is education? Manifestation of the perfection already in man. So everything is the same. Okay, one way he uses perfection, one way he uses manifestation of divinity. So everything is the same manifestation. For him, everything is these. So the highest ideal is already pegged in this man. So only the principles he has already enunciated, and that principles will be eternal principles. Those values will be eternal values. Processes he has left all of us to fend for ourselves and allow it based on the context, and that's what makes it eternally valuable wine.
Could you also touch on the second part of the question when I said I wanted to take you back to your 17-year-old self and find out, and if you could share what was it that moved you to make the decisions that you made?
See, actually, I could probably, if you look at that, like many of us over here, I also had no exposure to Vivekananda in its formal sense or in institutional sense, nor did I ever make an attempt to know about him. But in a world of India, you can never miss Vivekananda's word somewhere. Somebody would have spoken either such webinars, or a school teacher, or an annual day celebrations in a college. Somebody would have spoken about Vivekananda. That is something so permeating everywhere, because he has spoken about eternal truth and eternal values, okay, and eternal principles. So in that context, would have heard. So when I reached the college, I very hesitatingly, because of my own poverty issues, I joined the Mysore Medical College, though I wanted to become an engineer in the Indian Institute of Science. All my passion, but did not know where Indian Institute of Science even existed, except that it was in Bangalore. And only realized when I wrote a letter to the Indian Institute of Science from my house in Mysore, asking for a prospectus, that to get into an engineering, because I always said I want to be a BTech engineer from IISc. And then only I realized, when I got the response, that prospectus said that Indian Institute of Science wants you to have a BSc degree before you become a BTech graduate there. And that was the time when everything got bulldozed. And then I appeared for CET and got through for both medicine and surgery, medicine and engineering, only because the fact of this one is that my parents said you have to appear for both. I appeared, and I wrote only one college for my choice, because those days were no counseling. So my application had only one college, Mysore Medical College, because I never wanted to join medical college. I sincerely hope I will never get the college. But the very first day in the college, because I joined college, because again engineering results were not announced, and I didn't know whether I would get it in Mysore, where the only place my parents could afford me to study, because they were not ready to send me to any hospital, because they couldn't afford financially, not because of any other fear. So in that context, when I joined the medical college, in the very first hour of my college, my professor asked me, there were about 40 of us, and each of us were being asked the same question, saying that, why did you join medicine? And everybody were talking about how it is great to do humanitarian service, and how they are influenced by their private practitioners, their parents, to do service. And my chance came, and I was worried what to tell. And finally, I realized telling the truth is the easiest thing, because that comes from your spinal reflex. So I just told I'm waiting for my engineering results. And immediately the Professor Rajgopal, okay, who was a physiology professor, he suddenly asked, how much did I pay? I said 561 rupees. That was an annual admission fee. And he said, if you continue in medicine, how much more? I never even thought the question was relevant at that point of time, nor did I have the courage to go and ask him, okay, why did you ask that question when I said I'm only waiting for my engineering results? So he said, I just told him. He said, if you continue in medicine, how much more will you pay? I was a little perturbed, because he was only asking about money. And then I simply accounted, maybe 500 rupees, another 4 years, another 2,000. Okay, I said 2,000. Then he told, how much do you know? Government pays to make you a doctor. Till that time, I never realized why he was asking that question. And I didn't know the answer. I was dumb. I was standing. Then he told me 2 lakh rupees. And he didn't stop. He just looked out of the medical college. This one, Maharaja built a large building and Irvin Road is well visible from the corridor, from the classroom itself. He just turned around and said, you know who pays for it? All the people on the road. Okay. And here again, Vivekananda actually hit. So suddenly, I don't know why I recollected. I never read about him in this one. Somewhere, something subconsciously that hit me. So I remembered this famous statement: "So long as millions live in hunger and ignorance, I call each person a traitor who I will be educated. The cost of the millions pain, not the least to them." And this is where I got connected to him. So that's why many times if Vivekananda chose me, no, I didn't choose Vivekananda. So in that context, why am I connected to him? You should ask him, not me. So this is the story of our journey, and this also I recollected maybe somewhere some teacher might have proclaimed, and how teachers have an influence is also something that we need to look at. And each of these small experiences transform individuals.
A very inspiring story. I have one last question before I hand it over to Praveen. That is, today, if a young social entrepreneur, he wants to start something, or he or she wants to start something, do something, if there was one message that you would like them to look towards Swami Vivekananda and take from, what would that be, and how do you think that person should approach this social entrepreneurship itself?
In fact, Swamiji uses this word repeatedly. He says one word which comes out as a thunderbolt from the Upanishads is that abhihi, abhihi, abhihi. That is fearlessness, fearlessness, and fearlessness. And this fearlessness is something that is actually is what everybody should have, because this comes with a deep sense of faith in oneself. He defines further to talk about courage. He talks about Europeans and talks about the Indians. And he says what is more powerful also. In fact, the more you read about him, the more you get so implanted. For everything, he can actually celebrate India. Okay. So he talks about courage. He says the courage of the Europeans is of facing the cannons. But the courage of an Indian is that of a spiritual conviction, which can face everything. And he talks about the story of the Alexander coming into the country and talking about a monk who comes in this one, and Alexander, when he asks him to join him, and that says that, and when Alexander wants to kill him, that person says that I can neither be killed nor be burnt, and this one, that the same famous statement from the Bhagavad Gita he proclaimed. So in that way, that is the conviction, that is the courage that is there. So this is something. So how do you get this courage? This is also a beautiful analysis that I learned from Vivekananda's works, is that when somebody asks him saying that why should we be moral? Because he talks about morality as an equivalent to unselfishness, and unselfishness is equal to morality. And somebody asked him why he has to be moral. He states only one thing: to strengthen your will. So this morality giving you the strength of the will, and that strength of the will automatically makes you courageous. And once you become courageous, you'll be fearless. And once you are fearless, you can face the brute of this world. And that's where your institutions can be built. Okay. So I would look at Vivekananda in that context. And I would say any entrepreneur, whether it's business entrepreneur, social business entrepreneur, doesn't matter. I think his ideals are universal, and it can be embraced whether you are a politician or a householder, or a rich or an poor, an urbanite or a villager. It's universal truth. And that's why he continues to be.
Thank you so much. I think I will now ask Praveen to give us the closing remarks for today. And then Praveen.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. And it's always a pleasure to listen to Dr. MAB. I was just looking at, I was thinking of whatever he said. And when he closed with the remarks on fearlessness, and why anything is possible. I think that is something which everyone in SVYM will be able to relate to with maybe. And everyone who would walk up to him with an idea would always walk back thinking, oh, why didn't I think of 10x or 100x of 100 times of that. One part which I would like to highlight is for a generation of people of my age, like I haven't read Vivekananda myself for quite some time. I hadn't read Vivekananda until I came to SVY. I continue to be fairly illiterate in that area. But our understanding of Vivekananda has been through Dr. MAB and the others. And in the initial part of the lecture, when Dr. MAB mentioned about Vivekananda being the institution builder, and I could relate to a lot of those principles on which the Ramakrishna Math mission and the other institutions were built, very similar philosophical stands being taken in SVYM. And one of the things which I learned is not about what is, like I was not constantly told about what was being done, but being told about why something was being done the way it was being done. And from that, we get a glimpse of Vivekananda's philosophy. So I am sure we would have many more of these narrations in future, and that will help us understand the question that you had also asked, that Vivekananda's philosophy in the 21st century. Look at whatever Vivekananda told through the eyes of, or through the questions that come up in today's context. One last point before we end. For a lot of us, we think idealism isn't really a great way to life, or isn't an easy path in life. And when I first joined SVYM, I thought it's nice to have great ideals. I'll do what I can do, but I never had this idea that we can change the world, or that belief that we can change the world. So I would make one request to MAB sir to narrate this short story which he told me once about a monk in the Ramakrishna mission who made 4 statements about the society. That the society is a gymnasium, and how you can't expect the society to change, but you strengthen yourself. And I think that would be the most apt end to this lecture. Thank you for the opportunity, sir. It's always a pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you, Praveen. Any closing thoughts, Dr. MAB, before we bring the shutter down on the 3rd episode of this series?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think I was just looking at the issue of how practical this one. Recently, I was looking at one of the illumining industries started by one of the Vivekananda's devotees in Mumbai, who actually was, we were on the same panel sometime back in the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, and he was talking about it. And it was so deeply, and if I look at that, and it is for industries, and he's taking Vivekananda's philosophies into the Vivina. And he had a beautiful way of converting renunciation and service. Okay. So what are the two variables? What is renunciation? It is giving up. What giving up? How can an industry give up anything over there? So he converted renunciation as a commitment to a highest ideal. Because once you commit something to your highest ideal, you will do anything in the world for that ideal. That includes sacrifices. Automatically you will sacrifice. And I'm sure a simple matter of love for a marriage sake, you understand what all we do for this one. So in that context, you can say once you get onto an ideal, how can you be actually connected? The second thing he talked about is service. And how do you do service? It is actually a continuous belief and a commitment that there is an evolutionary potential of goodness in everybody. So, and evolutionary potential of all also. So that means every person can be better off than what he is today. And can I be contributing to it? That's all a service. Okay. So you can do it with your staff. You can do it with your clients. You can do it with your vendors. You can this one. So you know whatever he is, he can be better off tomorrow. So what can I do for it? So that element of service can be brought in. So most of the time, I would say an organization is in a mess because we have a shortage of three things. I would say the mess also is an acronym. Mess is you need to have a motivation. And for that motivation, you have to have the highest ideal. Second, you should enjoy. Enjoyment should come. So where do you get that enjoyment? Only when you're working for that highest ideal, you'll get enjoyment. Because you're motivated by that highest ideal and you work for that ideal. When these motivation is for a highest ideal, work is for a highest ideal, then automatically satisfaction creeps in. So if this MES is in short supply, you'll be in a mess. Okay. So motivation, enjoyment, and satisfaction should never have the last S. Otherwise, we'll be in a mess. Okay.
And
So thank you.
yeah, I think Praveen mentioned about the monk's take on the society. If you could take just 1 minute to share that this one, and then we will.
I think it's a well-known narration. Actually, the person who narrated this story was none other than the current president of the Ramakrishna Mission and Mutt, Swami Smarananandji. Oh. And he says it is like a dog. Society is like a dog's tail. And the dog's tail, he says, okay, first principle, society is like a dog's tail. Second principle, you have to straighten it. Okay. The third principle, it will not get straightened. It will bounce back the moment you leave. Fourth principle, you still have to straighten it. Okay. Why? Because it builds you. Okay. So if the society is not a, I would say, dog's tail, we would have been useless in this world. You have to thank the society because it is actually it's a dog's tail, which gives you immense opportunity to straighten it day in and day out and strengthen your muscles. When I mean muscle, it is as much the mental and emotional muscle as much as the physical muscle. And for that, you will develop this nerves of steel, as Vivekananda says. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nidhi. This has been a most inspirational and educative lecture we've had. And I wanted to thank you. I want to thank all of those who have joined us here as well as on YouTube. We will be sharing a recording of this, link to this recording shortly. And we thank you for coming, and we will continue to come. It happens on the 12th of every month. So we started with on the 12th of Jan, and we want to continue this till December 2022 with inspirational speakers and people who themselves have been inspired by Vivekananda and who want to share their journey. So we started with setting the context in terms of Vivekananda's enduring message. Then we looked at intersection of science, spirituality, and service. And today we looked at institution building. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Dr. Maybe. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Praveen.
Thank you all for this opportunity. I loved it.
Thank you, sir.
I really appreciate the effort that you've taken for every 12th till December. It is a great series. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very inspiring, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.